We have 60 minutes. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence and thread it back through a conversation that has unfolded over the arc of today. A conversation about transformation, about change, about transition. But before we do all of that, I want to take a little bit of your time, well, actually 20 minutes of your time, to tell you a slightly different story, to give you a little bit of the backstory of the moment we're in today. And I want to tell you a distinctly Australian story. I'm thinking back to the beginning of the day and Matt sitting here talking about being an Australian company, and I'm thinking about Damon saying stories matter because stories are the way we connect. And so what I want to do is tell you a story. And I want to tell you a story we don't talk about terribly much. The introduction here said I was a futurist, and I know it would be tempting to tell you a story about some bright, shiny, blinky new technology. But I want to go all the way back and tell you a story about a technology that's over 170 years old. But it's a technology that shaped the world we're in today. It's not electricity, it's not steam engines, although I love them both. This is actually a story we don't tell terribly often, but it's a story about telegraphy. And it's a story I've been chasing across Australia for the last 5 years. I've been looking for remnants of the telegraphy systems that we built in Australia in the 19th century. This is one little piece of one of those systems. That's 2 pieces of jarrah bolted together. They're about knee-high. They're in the Coorong next to a Cobb and Co road, and they were planted there in 1856. And if you go to that place, you can still see them there. And for me, there's something remarkable in imagining a technology that started in the 1830s can still be found in 2025. So I want to tell you why that story matters, how it relates to artificial intelligence, and what that story can tell us about the moment we find ourselves in now. Think of this as a parable, if that helps you. Think of it as an extended analogy. Think of it as me just getting my telegraphy nerd on, if that will help you too. So, like all good stories about technological transitions and transformations, this begins with a set of disparate innovations. It starts with people working out how to contain power in a glass jar, how to make the first batteries. On this stage over the arc of today, you've heard lots of conversations about batteries, but they have their genesis back in the 17 and early 1800s, when people worked out how to combine chemicals and have those chemicals release power, and to have that power become electricity. Wet cell chemical batteries. Once we had them, we started to work out what could you power with them and what would you do with it. And for a bunch of different people in the United Kingdom and in the United States and in Germany, they worked out that that power could run down a wire, and that wire could become electrified. Other people worked out that if you'd electrified that wire, you could send a signal. First, that signal was just making something move at the other end. Not very interesting. Then people worked out that you could interrupt that signal. You could interrupt the energy moving down the line and make something happen. The person who most worked that out is someone whose name we kind of know, because his name was Samuel Morse. Samuel Morse was an American. He was an artist before he discovered electricity. When he discovered electricity and telegraphy, he got really interested in how you might communicate with it. And he created something that we now know as Morse code, dots and dashes. Think of it as the original binary, the first 0 and 1. And once you could use Morse code and convert every letter into a signal and send it down the wire, you could move information. And indeed, information no longer required transportation to move. You didn't need a horse or a boat or a train. You just needed a pole and a piece of wire and a battery. First companies get built in the United States, in the UK. Those companies start to offer the promise of things happening in quote-unquote real time, because it's gone from taking hours, days, weeks to get information from New York to Baltimore, New York to Chicago, to taking minutes. And once you can move information that quickly, you can build new businesses. You can build businesses that rely on real-time information arbitrage. You can build banks. You can build commodities exchanges, and people did. Companies flourished, and commentators worried that this new technology was going to change everything. They said telegraphy would annihilate distance. It would collapse society. It would change the way we talk to each other. It would make people more informal. It would make things too quick. Should sound vaguely familiar. 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. In Australia, we discover gold in 1851, 1852, and Melbourne becomes the richest city on the planet. There is more money in Melbourne than anywhere else in the world, and lots of people come in search of their fortune and in search of gold. Amongst all those people that turn up in Melbourne in the 1850s, there are two men who come on a boat, the Glance, in August of 1853. Their names are Samuel McGowan and William Butcher. And in the boat that they are on, in the hold of that boat, there are rockers for gold and pickaxes and tents, and clearly all the equipment of men bound for the goldfields. But Samuel McGowan and William Butcher, they bring Morse code apparatus, batteries, wire, and a copy of the 1848 Canadian legislation on how to build an electric telegraphy system and company. Think of it as the first tech transfer. And they come to Australia because they think they're going to build their fortune here by making telegraphy. We're already 10 years behind everyone else, so they turn up to do this. And they meet, predictably, resistance. They go, we should build telegraphy. In fact, we should connect Melbourne, Adelaide, and Sydney. And everyone goes, really? We're just going to go to the goldfields. But McGowan persists, and he convinces the head of the colonial government in Victoria that he should build a prototype, one little tiny network, 16 kilometres from Melbourne to Williamstown. He has to find wire, make poles, he builds his own insulators because no one knows how to make them in Australia. He strings the wires, he has to avoid the marsh between Williamstown and Melbourne. And in the middle of 1854, his first network goes live. And suddenly, a whole lot of people in Melbourne work out that if you know what ship has come into port the same time it has come in and not have to wait a day or half a day, you have a business advantage. And people are willing to pay for that business advantage. And the colonial government goes from going, telegraphy to, mate, we're going to make you the superintendent of telegraph. And then telegraphs, and you should go build more. And he does. And between 1854 and 1856, he wires up Victoria. Ballarat, Bendigo, Geelong, anywhere there's gold gets a telegraph system. In the first year, 4,000 telegraphs are sent in Victoria. In the second year, 16,000. Everyone is interested. Businesses, newspapers, politicians, people who care about sport, not yet cricket, mostly horse racing. And everyone else around Australia, in all the other colonies, suddenly goes, why don't we have this? And in South Australia, the colonial government reaches back to England and says, send us a telegraphist. And a man named Charles Todd turns up on a boat 8 months later. He also brings technology with him. He brings magnets and batteries and 100 kilometres of galvanised wire. He meant business. And he connects his port to the city and starts to build out networks too. And he realises, along with McGowan, that they have the possibility of doing something extraordinary, of connecting Adelaide to Melbourne, of building one of the largest and longest telegraph networks in the world at that moment in time. And it's a bit complicated to work out how to do that, right? Because let's think back, 1855, 1856, when they start this adventure, electricity is in a jar. The only way to get around Australia is on horse or on boat. We don't yet have a functioning rail system. The roads are substandard. There is no indoor plumbing. There is functional literacy. And yet we have two men in two different cities convinced that they can connect those cities in real time with the most advanced technology in the world. And they do. They string a wire from Melbourne to Ballarat, to Hexham, to Streatham, to Warrnambool, to Port Fairy, to Portland, to Mount Gambier, to Robe, to Goolwa, to Port Elliot, to Wollonga, to Adelaide. It's my new cocktail party trick. I can string an entire line for you. And the line goes live in 1858, and messages start flowing. They work out a business model. They pass legislation, because suddenly it occurs to everyone, if people are telegraphing stuff around everywhere, we probably need to work out who the people are sending the messages and who's reading them and whether they're safe and if the telegraphists are going to be discreet, because I'm sending important business information. I probably don't want everyone to know about it. They argue about pricing. They argue about clipping the ticket. They argue about CapEx versus OpEx, a whole series of arguments that should feel deeply, deeply familiar to us in this present moment. And of course, once Adelaide and Melbourne are connected, my fine colleagues here in Sydney go, hey, what about us? We're sorry, we were busy with the train, but can we connect too? And so they connect. Tasmania's already in the game, Queensland too. Western Australia is slow to this party, and that's another story. They don't build telegraphy until the 1870s. You want to make it work, though? Like any transition, any new technological era, it's not just about the technology. It's actually about all the other things you need around it for it to be successful. You need expert labour. It turns out every one of those telegraph stations needed telegraphists who were specialised in Morse code, who knew how to run chemical batteries, who were willing to work 12-hour shifts, who were willing to hear a signal late in the night and power it down the wire. They were a very particular class of people and a very particular group, and you couldn't make telegraphy work without them. And it's tempting to think that's all you needed. But the reality is, as soon as you've made a system like this and you've convinced people that it's good and valuable and you've come to really like real-time information, you don't want that network falling down. And it turns out in Australia, bushfires, lightning strikes, frogs inside insulators, small boys with slingshots who really like the sound of porcelain going ding, all become a problem. And to manage all of that, you need an expert work crew who'll work the line, who'll repair it every day, who will spend their time ensuring that the system continues to function. Turns out you'll need more than that too. You're going to need a supply chain. For that first line between Adelaide and Melbourne, it was tens of thousands of wooden poles, 25 feet high, so multiple, 6 to 8 metres. Trees not that big growing across the Coorong or near Portland. They had to be imported from Western Australia. Swan River mahogany, which I come to realise is Jarrah, on boats all the way to make that work. Galvanised wire had to come from Europe because we didn't have an industry here. All of those pieces had to move to Australia to make the system function. And by the way, much like today's data centres, every one of these telegraph stations needed water because those batteries needed water. A supply chain. And then people keep innovating. In the 1850s, people discovered a product called gutta percha, which was the sap of a tree that turned out to be a really good insulator and could wrap copper wire when it was submerged in water. And suddenly you go from lines in the air to lines under the water. And when you can put lines underwater, you can make a global network. And when you can make a global network, you don't just have to connect your country, you can connect all the countries. And in 1872, after another mad engineering adventure that saw Charles Todd run a line from Adelaide to Darwin in 18 months, in Darwin, he met an undersea cable, and in August 1872, Australia connected to that whole global network. And it went from taking 45 days on the fastest ship with the wind behind you to get news from London to Sydney to taking 10 minutes in the first month and minutes in the weeks that followed that. And if you can do that, you can change everything. And everything changed. Telegraphy built markets. It built the wool market in Australia. It built the wheat market in Australia. It built multiple waves of mineral extraction markets in Australia. It was an extraordinary tool for many things, and it had impacts. impacts. Some of them were knowable. If you collapse time, people will find ways of taking advantage of that. If you can deliver information in real time, you can have better safety and security, and people did. We could save people when there were disasters. All of those things were in some ways knowable. But like all good systems, there were things that happened that were unintended. For telegraphy, some of those unintended consequences include the fact that telegraphy is one of the threads that opens up Australia. It is the spine of Central Australia in the 1870s. It is part of a wave of colonial violence for First Nations people that is present into the current time. It also changed the way we thought about time and space, and that wasn't always good. It was a tool for surveillance. Police loved telegraphy. Took criminals a while to work out that their face and an image and a description of them was being sent to the next telegraph station, and it meant that every telegraph station in Australia in this period was near a police shop. Unintended consequence in some ways, right, about surveillance and power. There were also unexpected consequences, things that I think none of the makers of telegraphy imagined would happen. What you're looking at there is a weather map created by Charles Todd, because he asked every station master in every telegraph station in South Australia to send him the weather once a day, and he plotted them on a map. Over time, he became aware of how weather changes in Australia. He was the first white person to identify the southeastern dipole, i.e. the way the weather changes. He worked out that if it was raining in Eucla, it would rain in Renmark sometime later. That data set forms the basis of the bomb that we all use today. Because at the time, telegraphy wasn't just about the throughput of data, it was about the collection of data. Telegraphy also helped us set state boundaries and time zones. So if you've ever wondered why it is that South Australia is half an hour behind everyone else, you should blame telegraphy. It also had lasting impacts on culture. We are not that many weeks past the day colloquially known in Australia as the day when the race that stops the nation happens. You want to know the reason we call it the race that stops the nation? Because in the 1880s, there was so much traffic on the line when the Melbourne Cup ran that they had to put in extra wires to Flemington, and ultimately they discovered that it was better to clear all the traffic on the line for the time that the Melbourne Cup ran. So we call it the race that stops the nation because it was actually the race that stopped telegraphy. There are other stories just like that about why we know about Ned Kelly, telegraphists sending out the news of the siege in Glenrowan in real time. Lots of consequences, right? It also shaped every Australian town that many of us know. This is Geelong, Ryrie Street in the downtown area. This building here with a black ball on top is the telegraph station. This photo is from 1860. It's a really old one in the State Library of Victoria's collection. Around that telegraph station is already developing a civic building and a court structure and banks. And over time, all of those things would be there in Geelong. In almost every Australian city, if you look for the post office, which was also the telegraph station back in the day, around it you will find banks and civic buildings and a court. And frequently you will find a pub, at least one, somewhere across the street, because while it was happening in real time, it wasn't always real time. And it's tempting to think that all of that is somewhere in our deep past. But the reality is, telegraphy was the heartbeat as a technology for the 19th century. But if you go looking really carefully, you can still find it in the 20th and the 21st century. Andrew Mears, who's one of my colleagues and is in the audience tonight or this afternoon, took this photo in Geelong about 2.5 weeks ago. That little tiny black ball in the middle there, that's the telegraph station. It's still there, in the same place it's always been, surrounded by now a civic arts centre and a post office on the same block, not doing the same work, but reminding us that the choices we make and the technologies we make don't go away. So where does all of that leave us, and why did I want to tell you this story other than the fact that telegraphy is definitely my jam? Well, I wanted to tell you this story because I think there's something about a technology that we built between 170 and 150 years ago that should feel familiar. A story that isn't just about technology, it's about people. It's about the businesses they built, it's about the challenges that they had. In making telegraphy work, multiple people around Australia and around the world had to think about safety in particular. They worried about the safety of the line, the safety of the message, the safety of their workers. They worried about whether their businesses were sustainable, not necessarily whether the environment was. And when I teach, and I'm lucky enough to still be in a classroom, I always tell my students, history doesn't give us answers, but it gives us better questions. It gives us better ways to say, if the AI transition is really the transition that is coming, and I believe it is, what are the things we need to ask ourselves? Not just about the technology, but about who are our expert labourers, who are our work crews and our supply chains, what will be the unintended consequences and the unexpected benefits, and how will we think about the lasting impacts and the choices we make. Because this image here is a drone shot. Andrew and I argued about it on the road just south of Mari in South Australia. I wanted him to take this picture with a drone because I could see something in it at the time he couldn't. The telegraph line went here, the rail went here, That's the NBN running straight up the middle, and that's a road on the far side. You can see that the road washes out regularly when you look at this image. Because it turns out telegraphy was put in to follow the water and rail followed telegraphy, and the road followed both of those because there was an infrastructure corridor, and NBN just got stuck there in the middle. And the choices that were made for that telegraphy line were made in 1870. This photo was taken in 2023. Every single one of us will make choices that will echo sometimes only 5 or 10 years, but sometimes 100, and I think we should do them thoughtfully. So how do you end all of that? Well, in 2 ways. I wanted to end where the day began. I was lucky enough to be in the room when Mitch Heritage did an acknowledgement to country, and I want to join my voice to his and remind everyone and to think about what it means, as I do every day, that we're on the lands that have been occupied by First Nations people for 60,000 years. When we talk about transitions and change, we talk about it in a context of extraordinary continuities as well. I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to think about what that means as both our privilege and our responsibility. So, you've heard about 19th century telegraphy. I know you're secretly really here to talk about AI. Good news is I have other people who want to talk about AI too, and I would like you to join me in welcoming to the stage a group of people who represent a delightful cross-section of the AI tech stack and who have promised that we will have a completely excellent conversation. So will you join me in welcoming them? I am really excited about this last panel, and I hope you will be too. We have some extraordinary people here who, as I said, represent a cross-section of the tech sector, and we've been lucky enough to have at least, one or several conversations before we got here, so I know this will be lively. Although it may not be clear in the parable I've just given you about AI, I am inclined to think that there is much to talk about in the intersections of AI, sustainability, and how we navigate climate change. Clearly, AI can play a dual role in these spaces. It's both a driver for sustainability and for sustainability innovation, but it's also a technology that has its own environmental impact, and we've heard that from multiple people throughout the day, whether it's about the supply chain for the materials in it, whether it's about the needs of data and server farms. We've been talking about the impact for some time. For me, and I think for everyone else on this panel, it's why this way of thinking about it as a system or a stack is really a useful starting point. We committed before we all got on stage that we were going to talk about this in a really pragmatic way. I know there are lots of conversations about AI that start with the robots are going to kill us and end with the robots are going to kill us. And I thought it would be useful to have a conversation that was a little bit both more pragmatically grounded in what's happening now and that takes advantage of who's on the stage to also give us some ways of thinking about things we could be doing and doing differently. I'm also aware that lots of people have lots of definitions of AI. I used to joke that if you were in a room with 10 people, there were more definitions of AI than there were people in the room. And so I'm acutely aware that it might be a good place to start by actually talking a little bit about how we define AI. And so I told everyone we'd have a lightning round at the beginning. Question is straightforward. I know Rick looks really anxious. It will be fine, Rick. It's a really simple question. I'm going to start with you. How does your organisation define and use AI to support sustainability, and what steps are you taking to ensure your AI is responsible and as resource efficient as possible? Go.
First of all, I think I'll come out last next time.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you for the question. So AI, at least it's one of those things I can spell, so that's another good start as well. For me and for our organisation, AI is using software to be able to emulate human capabilities in a nutshell. That's really where it is. It's not new. It's been around for some time. In terms of the kind of the impact that you talked about, energy consumption, water consumption, we are obviously one of the leading AI companies in the world. And we always take a balanced approach to this. So I would say that we have to look at all of the possibilities of AI. If we look at our energy transition in Australia, we can't do that without being able to model, simulate, operate the next generation grid. You look at climate resilience and modeling short-term weather patterns, you need AI. However, it has an impact on not just energy and water consumption, but it also has impact on things like community supply chains and others. So we spend a lot of time actually seeing how we can actually mitigate against some of those impacts so we can provide more sustainable solutions for our customers who are ultimately consuming our capabilities. We built a wooden data center last year, believe it or not, in 2024 in the US. And don't say something like, oh, it wouldn't operate, so we went back to something else. Cheesy joke. Thank you for laughing.
Wow, that was an excellent dad joke, and I wasn't going there.
It was a dad joke. I told you my kids look at me like that all the time. But just a few weeks ago, we launched Microsoft's most advanced data center in the world, and we've taken a lot of different actions we could take to make it as sustainable as possible. So I'll just rattle through those quickly, and we can move on. So, yes, yeah, I did that.
Sneaky.
So the first thing is, in terms of the materials that we actually use inside of the data centers themselves, we look at low-carbon steel, low-carbon cement to mitigate against embodied carbon. The data center runs fully, 100% on renewable energy, low-carbon source, and we've actually added to the grid by putting renewable energy farms in there with the local power utility company so that we're not taking other people's energy. Believe it or not, we've actually negotiated our electricity bills to be up so it doesn't impact the energy bills of the local community. So we have that side. In terms of water, particularly in historical data centers or legacy data centers, water consumption is massive. So we actually use in that facility now one fill, zero lossless technology. So on startup, you fill it with water, and then it's lossless, and you don't take any more water to actually cool all the servers and so on inside of the data center itself. All of the servers are getting more and more efficient. The actual models themselves are getting more and more efficient. So what we're seeing as is AI usage goes up, at least the energy consumption is starting to come down, but there's still an impact. Some more interesting things, though. Just outside the fence,
Yep.
we're actually focused on rewilding because we took over an existing site and we're putting rewilding there. We use biomimicry to actually attract species to come back towards the data center itself. And we actually use this as an opportunity for skilling, training, and jobs for the local community itself. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Could I just leave with one context on this, though?
I'm not sure how I'm going to stop you.
Good. For me, I hear every single day, and I'm exactly as sure you do and the rest of the panelists, that AI is consuming energy, and it's this massive consumer of energy. If we actually put that into context, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, believes that data centers worldwide in 2025, they take around it's like 1 to 2% of global energy. Inside of the data center, that's 19 to 20% is AI. So it's 0.3 to 0.4% of energy consumption worldwide, which is less than TVs that have been watched around the world. So it is a lot smaller than we think. By 2030, it'll probably go up to about 1.2%. But I wanted to leave it to say this, that it may be small compared to the big, heavy emitting sectors out there, but all organizations, particularly ones the size of Microsoft, it's not just a need for us to act sustainability, to mitigate against that. We actually have a responsibility to mitigate against that impact that we are actually creating.
Well, I think over the arc of today, and I know you were here for some of the conversations as I was too, there are definitely lots of contested, I think, opinions about energy use and water use. And I think, as we continue to work out what are going to be the best metrics and how those metrics are benchmarked, we're going to continue to see the kind of both, I think, reasonable citizen pushback about what does this mean, but also how to think about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Full in agreement.
Justin.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. How does your organisation define and use AI to support sustainability? Go.
Well, you wanted a definition of AI.
I did.
And the definition I like that circles around sometimes is that AI stands for almost implemented. Once it's implemented, we stop calling it AI. You call it a optical character recognition, a license plate reader, a spell checker. But I think it's just useful to remember that when what we're calling AI will suddenly, and it's part of the objective actually of Salesforce as an organization to really. We talk a lot about agents and agentic AI in particular, and we operate at that level of the stack, which is really at the enterprise integration into workflows, which is very different to owning data centers or even being a model vendor, a major frontier model vendor and things like that. So we have a different kind of responsibility, and part of that responsibility is really us about being our own customer zero for our own technology and ensuring that our own sustainability goals are met by our own products in the way we become an agentic enterprise ourselves. And so we do that in a number of different ways, but one of the key ways we do it is, and we talked about this a lot, is really about smart demand, efficiency, and clean data sources are really the key things for us. From a smart demand perspective, it's just about using the right tool at the right time. So not only creating a platform that enables customers to choose the right technology at the right time or combine those technologies in really important ways. So not using AI for things that you don't want to use AI for, or using the right kind of AI in the right context. Even the difference between generative and predictive AI can make a huge difference. Because we have some research that looked at the different tasks, and there's 1,450 times the different carbon emissions between the use of certain model for one task versus another. From an efficiency perspective, our research teams focus on creating smaller models rather than bigger models. We're trying to create the smallest possible model that'll work and leveraging the kind of context in which we know that model is going to be used to make it as small as possible and as efficient as possible. We also try and create defaults in the platform to create a path of least resistance that's most sustainable, which we use ourselves and we use for our customers. And lastly, clean data sources is really about leveraging the differences between regions and using those, and actually doing a bit of kind of data center arbitrage, if you like. There are data centers that have less carbon intensity and less water stress, and trying to prioritize those and move the load that our platform places on that grid in different places.
Look, and I think it's a useful observation twofold, right? One is that AI can be a cover-all term. I mean, even in your answer, you talked about models, you talked about automation, you talked about systems, you talked about data. And I think one of the things that I imagine, and I know this from my previous life of trying to teach people about what AI was. Yeah. One of the struggles is always that it's a term that it's a little loose in how people use it. And I'm always also struck by the fact that it's funny that it's loose, given that it's a term that's actually been around since 1956. And so there's a lot of people stuffing a lot of things into that sort of term to do a lot of work, which is a terrible segue, Amy, for you. So Intel, a company that obviously I know a little bit about, so I promise I'm not going to grade your homework. How does your organization define and use AI to support sustainability? The short version.
Yeah, I do want to talk about kind of that progression. We just used to call it analytics, and we used to call it machine learning, where we trained a machine and then it did something for us. And then there was deep learning, where we kind of let it do its own learning for a bit and see what it worked out, and now into these huge generative AI models that kind of incorporate all of that previous learning into some really new and interesting use cases. So stuff like computer vision, it's quite mature now, but stuff like agentic AI is something that we're still trying to work out how we're going to use it. And of course, there's this ongoing question: are we going to get to some sort of AGI at some point, where there is an AI that thinks for itself, that has that equivalent intelligence to this general intelligence that humans have? So as you said, there's a lot of different work that those two letters are doing. And I guess for Intel ourselves, we are a product manufacturer. Like we run a manufacturing chain and a supply chain around the world, and so we look at where we're building the building blocks for AI. So when we're manufacturing a product that goes into all of these data centers, into the computers that run the AI, we want to make sure that we're manufacturing that in the most sustainable way possible. So things like having renewable energy powering our fabrication plants as well as those data centers. We're now at 99% renewable energy, and similarly, we have to build new renewable power plants to get to 100%, because otherwise you're just taking it from all of the local consumers and they don't get to have any renewable power in their grid. And similar, water is a huge thing for our manufacturing as well. While manufacturing semiconductors is one of the most power-intensive manufacturing processes that humans undertake, it's also one of the most water-intensive. And so we operate desalination plants and water purification systems, try and reuse as much water as possible. And our aim is to be water positive. So we're returning more water to the local watersheds than we take out. So similar to rewilding, we are re-wetting the local environments that we operate in. We're at 4 of our sites are now water positive as well. So really good aims. We're trying to set ourselves really strict targets to meet these goals for ourselves, so that as our products, enter into all these data centers and AI use cases, they've been manufactured as sustainably as possible. But then we look at once they're in use, like, this is just the embodied carbon. Once they're being used, then that's the operational carbon, and we don't want to ship something that is going to then use a whole lot of power. So this is where we do work with Microsoft and Salesforce to make sure that those operational efficiencies and all of the enhancements that we build into our technology can be exposed and used to drive that lower power to get those AI models to run in a most efficient manner that they possibly can. So we do heaps of stuff with all of our all of our partners. I guess that third pillar is really that we can't do all of this by ourselves.
Yeah.
It's only by all working together, which is like the whole point of this event, by sharing our knowledge with each other about how we use AI and how we can do it most efficiently, that we can achieve that.
And I have managed to already lose control of my panel. I'm doing well. But I think for me, what I take out of that, right, is that, and I hope you in the audience do as well, is that there are lots of different ways that people are going to end up delivering AI, right? Sitting here, we have people who are from Intel building the underlying silicon technology. We have the software stack, and we have a bunch of applications that sit there, and each one of those will have a different part of the journey, have a different set of responsibilities, and a different capacity to influence the outcome, right? The arc of today, for those of you who've been here throughout all of it, and those of you who've just come recently, has really been about how do we think about navigating the next 25-year cycle, so a generation, right? And how we think about navigating a generation that will see continuing change in climate and where there is a substantial set of energy choices and transitions we need to make. And I think every panel that has been on stage has reflected both on the journey, on the work, and have made pretty clear that it's about not just what we say, but what we're actively doing. And I think when we talked about the kind of conversation we'd wanted to unfold here, we'd said there were sort of two threads we really wanted to unpick. One about how each one of your organizations was driving innovation around AI and what were real-world applications of that. And I think every one of you has given me a little bit of a teaser of that, but I'm going to come back and kind of drill down on that a bit more. And then I think I wanted to round out the end here very much about how we think about responsible AI and how we think about sustainability, not just as an energy thing, but an organizational piece, if we can do that. So 2 more pieces of this conversation. So if we bridge out of how do we define AI and how we're thinking about that stack of technologies and services that deliver it. Justin, for you, I'm going to come back to you to talk about real-world impact and innovation and about what Salesforce is doing, leveraging AI to help businesses with their sustainable data and how they're turning those into actionable insights, and how you're thinking about responsible innovation, which I thought was a delightful phrase that you used on the phone the other day, and I wanted you to kind of unpack that a little bit. Discuss.
Yeah, I think that, just little things. Just
Small things.
Short answer. Look, first thing I want to say is really that sometimes we think about, when we're trying to be practical, we think we need to be certain about the outcome first and then just drive towards it. I think what's really fascinating to me about the role that AI can play in advancing sustainability is the uncertainty about how ways of working will change in the future in response to AI. And just to take a step back from that, I think there's an earlier thing, which is we all talk about productivity gains from AI, and I think people who work in sustainability are incredibly human resource constrained. And so part of the initial opportunity is just to give them that kind of abundance that you hope to gain out of AI is really an opportunity for especially people working in sustainability. And we find that our own teams leverage our tools like Net Zero Cloud and things like that to make their reporting requirements go much faster. I mean, that works internally inside an organization to be able to compose or synthesize large amounts of data and meet compliance obligations. And we're finding that agentic AI, the use of agents and things like that, can actually works in compliance contexts incredibly well to simplify and accelerate or lower the cost of that compliance. So that's the first thing.
Do I need to pause you there?
Yeah.
Agentic AI, hands up if everyone knows what it is.
Everyone knows what it is. No.
That's like maybe 30% of the room.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just the difference between, look, it's the difference between using AI to translate or transform data in some way and using it to take action. So delegating some sort of responsibility to an AI system to be able to I think of it in terms of discretionary action is what makes the difference between it being an AI agent and being a dumb workflow or a programmed or traditional software application or something like that. So taking discretionary action and understanding that, for example, just in a compliance context, you never know what data you're going to get in what order and what data you're going to need to go hunting for and request. And so having an agent that can kind of take responsibility for compiling the data that's needed and having a kind of a definition of done that it's working with, to go, okay, when you have this data, then you're ready to compile a kind of report or some sort of information delivery to meet that compliance requirement is a huge benefit. I mean, we do that in other contexts too, just in terms of, maybe a call into a call center works roughly the same way. You never know what information the user in that call center is going to give you first. So that non-linear relationship between information and output is really an important part of agentic AI. But I think the other element of it that's really fascinating is, as I said, the way it transforms work by enabling different forms of coordination. So just to give you an example, we've invested in a company called Panellists as part of our Salesforce Ventures work, which does bushfire detection. And it can detect a bushfire in a matter of minutes. But just as importantly, it's a matter of seconds before it can update all the different stakeholders who need to be notified of that bushfire and provide the appropriate information in the appropriate format for them to be able to act on that. So it actually plays an orchestration role as well as just a detection role. And I think that orchestration role is where a lot of the real benefit will come from. I think when we think about things like Scope 3 emissions, they represent such an enormous not only a data gathering challenge, but to be able to act on them, an enormous orchestration challenge. And so the possibility of kind of taking advantage of that, of these kind of technologies to orchestrate ecosystems or commercial ecosystems or relationships of some kind in a way that just would be overwhelming for humans or impractical or uneconomical for humans to be able to manage is where I see the real opportunity in the future.
And Rick, we talked a lot about this too, right? About the fact that the temptation in some ways up until this moment in time has been each organization operates by itself, right? Is that it's sort of tempting to say, it's mine, my AI, my tech, my kit, I'm doing this thing over here. But in order to both, I think, achieve some of the sustainability goals that we've talked about on this stage and to manage the complexity that we have coming, it's not just enough for people to go it alone anymore, right? And I think, I know Microsoft spends a lot of time thinking about the orchestration, as Justin was called, but collaboration, I think, is how Microsoft thinks about it. One example, Rick.
I will give you one example. That's totally fine. I've got about 50 of them, but
I know, so pick the best one, Rick.
I'll pick the best. I'll keep it at home versus being abroad. So Microsoft are one of the organizations that are part of the Australian Climate Leaders Coalition. So if you don't know what the CLC is, there's over 50 organizations coming together to take collective action around climate change and getting towards net zero. So we see that as a responsibility. Microsoft are actually the lead organization focused on the AI deep dive working groups, and we're working with other fantastic organizations like Telstra, like CBA, like others. But what we've really said in there is that each organization is doing its own part, but we can't accelerate the sustainability challenge and the outcomes we want to drive without actually having collective action, because otherwise we're all off in our own little swim lanes having minimal impact. So from an AI perspective in those working groups, we've released 3 studies already. The first one is on the positive impact of AI. There are lots of positive impacts of AI that we do need to mitigate against. The second...
Where can people find that report?
That's on the Climate Leaders Coalition website. If you go under publications, that's on there. All 3 of them are under the AI group. There's plenty of other stuff on there around circular economy, regional transitions, and other great stuff. But that's
I'm enough of a professor. It's like you have homework now.
Yeah, you got homework. That's the first one. The second one, we've really looked and drilled down to say we know that we're getting more and more into the detail on things like climate reporting. So how do we use AI to really help with Scope 3 reporting? So gathering the data, looking at high quality data, poor quality data automatically using AI, predicting where there's poor quality data, filling in those gaps, and using AI to model and simulate scenarios. So that's the second paper. And then the third paper is really around how we collectively think about the data center sector and actually mitigate against all those things that I talked about earlier. We do want to not just talk about theory, though. So the next 2 projects that we're working on around how we translate some of that learning into action. So we're working on now a green data center coalition for Australia, where we want to build a standardized approach for how we can actually take that out to market. So we build things in a standardized way. And then the second project is around sustainable beer. So how do we use AI to model and simulate...
Say beer, right?
Beer, B-E-E-R. It's my British accent, I'm sorry. Beer. So how we can actually model and simulate the value chain, minimize waste along the value chain. And no surprising, that's my favorite project out of all of them.
Nice. I feel like there's a really good pun there about getting off the same page and into action, but I can't quite get there.
Yeah.
Something, 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 dad joke.
I'm quite good at those, as you know.
I know.
Yeah.
Look, Amy, I know Intel does a lot of work in this space too, thinking about innovation, thinking about real-world impact, and particularly thinking around things like open standards and low-power applications. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, open standards, that's part of that, exposing what we do to the rest of you. So that's, the democratization of these kinds of technologies so that they are accessible to all and not locked behind some sort of proprietary firewall. We have that, not just with, our products, but with through the software stack. I mean, that's an important part of having, a computer is actually having software that will run on it and that will run sustainably and efficiently. And so, at Intel ourselves, we run AI to help with the design work and the validation work and optimize our manufacturing lines. But then we want to make sure that when you get the product, you can also have that streamlined, optimized AI. So whether that is, just running things in low power modes, or if it is, trying to right-size your AI to run most efficiently and take advantage of all of the cool technology that we pack into it, accelerators, optimizers, offload engines, all of these things, if they're there and you don't use them, then you're not going to be able to get the benefit out of it. So one of my favorites is that, an Australian invented it, and so, we then employed him and got it to work for Intel and released it out open source, something called flame graphs. So it was originally used just to look at how your CPU is running and where the most, where your software code is pulling the most power. And then so we hired this guy, said, well, let's do this for AI as well. And so let's look at your AI model and pick out the pieces that are consuming the most power so that you can go and optimize those parts. And so being able to, first of all, pinpoint where you need to optimize, but then providing open tools that you can go then and help actually do it. So look up things like the Green Software Initiative, something that Intel helps, contributes to help make sure that you can optimize your AI models once you've worked out where to do it. There's all of these tools out there that we open source to help the community do it.
So what I'm hearing from all of you, though, is that interesting balance between using the innovations in-house. So how do we use them to improve our own factories? How do we use them to improve our own data centers? How do we use them to improve our own workflows? And also, how do we find ways of taking some of those innovations and giving them to the public, making them open source, providing them in ways where lots of people can share them? Because it strikes me that one of the pieces of the puzzle, and it's come up on this stage all day long, is that this is going to require concerted collective action, not just individual action. And so each one of the pieces of this puzzle is also about contributing to that. Look, I wanted to kind of pivot us out of thinking about innovation and the impact that has to the broader kind of conversation that really, I think, is a nice place to end, about how we think about responsible AI. A lot of people talk about it. It has lots of different ways that it gets talked about: ethical AI, responsible AI, sustainable AI. And I think there's a little piece here about how each one of us in our different organizations is both thinking about governance, is thinking about how we manage everything from principles about fairness and equity, lots of different sort of puzzle pieces there. And I know across each one of you, there are very different things you are doing in this space. And Justin, I might sort of start with you about how Salesforce really is embedding responsible AI principles. I'm thinking fairness, transparency, sustainability. But I'm thinking about the ways you're embedding them, not just into the tech, but into your own organization as principles that kind of thread through all of that. Discuss.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're very proud of the fact that we've had a continuous, an Office of Ethical and Humane Use in place, run by the inimitable Paula Goldman for the last more than 10, I think it's 10 years now. And they're still a very powerful part of the organization. And what we found is actually that group, which was dedicated to developing not only policy internally, but also building out the kind of, I guess, moral muscle memory of our development organization to be able to understand how to do things like consequence scanning and do red teaming at scale and all those kinds of things. But what they've actually spawned is an AI council that we use internally with their own innovations and ideas for AI use cases that we use internally. And what we found is that, the theory was fast cars need good brakes, that having good governance in place will allow you to turn corners and change direction if you need to and pivot and things like that. But actually, we found that created a pipeline, a clear pipeline for AI innovation inside the organization, which has allowed us to actually accelerate our use of our own tools internally and change our business operations internally.
So at what point in that conversation did you start thinking that energy and sustainability were part of the ethical AI conversation?
It has been from the very start. Like the very first set of responsible AI guidelines we released had sustainability at the core of it. We have a head of sustainable AI who works very closely with the Office of Ethical and Humane Use. And I think this is one of those situations where it's interesting. In our organization, responsible AI is the precursor for sustainable AI. I think it's interesting that elsewhere, in other customers' organizations, often it's the sustainability governance that sets the kind of framework or has laid the path for responsible AI governance, in the sense that it's a cross-disciplinary, kind of seems like an amorphous problem to solve, and the ability to delegate that through organizations into the business units themselves is really, really important. And that's something that sustainability has actually done a lot more of, because people have spent more time grappling with the problem of governing for sustainability than they have with governing AI. The flip side for us is trying to, and this is part of the challenge of being a platform, is that we have to give our customers as much freedom as possible in how they configure and express their values through our platform. But what we try and do is create as much of the mechanisms, the transparency, the observability, to enable good governance, and to enable that good governance not just buried away in an IT department or a data science department, but actually rippling available throughout an organization. So it's actually closer to where the decisions need to be made about what responsible behavior looks like, which is normally in the business unit and not in the IT department.
And I know you don't mean to say there that you're a platform and so you're not responsible.
Quite the opposite. I think, no, it's a really good point. And I was thinking about this is like the difference between moral pluralism, to get philosophical for a second. I did warn you ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have, if I got to say I was a Telegraph nerd, I should have said, Justin is a recovering philosopher.
Yeah, unrecovered, unreconstructed or something. Anyway, the difference between moral pluralism, like making room for different value systems, and amoralism, like thinking that you should not have any sort of expression of value. So we'll have things like system prompts inside our AI tools that help to enable kind of safe usage of those tools, or respect baseline human rights and things like that, and just baseline expectations. But we expect our customers to build their own safety mechanisms and value systems, and embed their own value systems on top of them, as they should. But making that easier, lowering the cost of doing that, is really important. Because you don't want that to be the limiting factor, to be the reason why everyone goes, oh, we don't have time for that, or we don't have the money for that. If we can make that cheaper, then we're doing our bit to ensure that that responsibility is executed in as many places as possible.
Absolutely. You know I'm going to ask you, because we talked about this. And we had a whole conversation about there was going to be a philosophical intervention. And then you were going to say, let me give you a really practical example.
I'd love to give you a practical example.
I know you've got 50 of them, so let's just take another one.
52.
52, okay, good. So this one, I think, again, thinking about AI governance, thinking about energy efficiency, asset optimization as ways of achieving sustainability, and using AI for that. Practical example, doesn't have to be in Australia. This
one's not going to be in Australia. I have a few, but this one's not in Australia. And I'd like to make it more of a feel-good story, if that's okay. So we started working with SSE, Scottish and Southern Energy, in the UK. They're the largest renewables organisation in the UK. We've been using AI to work with them to optimise their performance. So they build wind turbines, wind parks. So we've used AI for some time to help them design the wind turbines, the kind of the location of each turbine against each other, everything from the length of the blade to the yaw angle of the blade and the speed of the blade to get output. So we've been doing that for some time. But they, as an organization, wanted to say we want to operate ethically wherever we actually operate our wind turbines. So they operate the wind turbines, but they operate in areas of outstanding natural beauty. So they have things like bird species, they have things like bat species, and they're not really compatible with wind turbines when they go around at speed. So what historically happens is during bat or bird migration season, they have to stop the wind turbines from operating, otherwise splat. So we actually worked with them and we introduced the concept of using high definition video and AI models which actually in real time track the migration of the birds or the bats, and then the AI model can automatically adjust the speed of the wind turbine blades to allow the actual birds and bats to safely pass through. That means they're not having the impact to the environment, but they're also able, from a business perspective, to continue to produce green energy, which is really important. The other thing that's really nice in there, they operate on something called the Isle of May. And Isle of May has got one of the largest colonies of puffins, super cute birds, little tiny things if you've never seen them. So they have to prove that they're not having an impact with their operations on the local wildlife. So historically, they have people that go out on boats, they go to every nest, they pull them out and they count them. We actually use AI and video in real time now, and we actually can analyze and predict where all the birds are in the right nests, not having an impact. So who doesn't love a puffin story?
I'm punless or puffinless. I don't know. I don't even know where to go with that. But no, I think, there is an interesting question, and it's useful to think that there are applications where it is not about efficiencies in the classic sense of that, so not in economic efficiencies or productivities in the ways we've historically understood that, but things that are about how do we use the technology to solve challenges that have historically been more complicated and use them in order to make the possibilities of environmental sustainability, continuities of less disturbance, which I think probably doesn't classically fall into the productivity discourse, which suggests there's another metric we're going to have to think about. Not quite the puffin index, but something about what does it mean to think about other ways of saying the technology is having a positive effect that isn't necessarily about an economic transformation, but a life transformation, an ecological one, a sustainability one, if you want to think about it that way. It's sort of interesting for me to contemplate what that would look like.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I think about AI is a tool. It's a piece of tech. It's useless on its own. It has to provide value, and that value comes in many forms. And it can be a lot softer, as well as producing energy, which is quite hard for them.
Yeah, but I think, the discourse we have around it at the moment is very much focused on what are the productivity gains, or we've had this technology for X number of years, why isn't productivity better? And I think there's something about asserting what other metrics might be that feels like an interesting kind of...
Can I offer a really, maybe it's a little bit controversial, but one way I think about it is AI allows organizations to bite off more complex problems than they had before. And one consequence of that is that a small organization can now bite off the problems that are previously reserved for a medium-sized organization can bite off the problems for a large organization. So as a large organization, you have to decide, are you going to become a medium-sized organization, or are you going to bite off a bigger problem? And there's really no bigger problem for us to bite off than sustainability. And even going to the point of like circular economy and things like that are really, they're hard to coordinate. They're coordination problems. And I loved what you said about telegraphs and telegraphy.
Telegraphy.
Telegraphy, okay.
Telegraphy.
The accent's on the second syllable. Got it. Because that suddenly this new coordination, this new orchestration capability unleashed a whole range of new businesses that were not there before. And I think that's the thing we should be reaching towards. And it may be the only way of guaranteeing the longevity of your organization, which longevity of large organizations has been declining for the last 25 years. That maybe this is the moment where that complexity of that problem is appropriate to bite off and actually addressable.
Oh, absolutely. Well, telegraphy was all about solving the last mile problem. It's actually nerdily where we get that phrase from. Messages were free, delivered within a mile of the telegraph station. And so the last mile problem is the last mile free. And so in the early era of telegraphy, people who wanted to be close to the data source moved close to the telegraph station because they could get the information for nothing. And it meant that both big and small businesses moved that way. Sorry. Amy, circular economy.
It's an obsession.
I told you, I warned everyone, I was very clear. I'm very nerdy about telegraphy because I think it's interesting. Justin mentioned circular economy, and I know, because we've spent time together, that's really near and dear to your heart, and I know it's a piece that you have driven really impressively at Intel, and thinking about how this sits inside long-term environmental benefits for AI.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Yeah, so I mean, it is something I took on as a bit of a personal mission here in Australia to find out the path that our silicon products take through the Australian, as they're used by customers, but then as they're no longer needed as well, to see what happens at the end of that life cycle. I went and visited a lot of e-waste plants here, and I wanted to think about how can we, better, make sure that silicon that comes through is reused and has a longer life as possible, and can be, turned into something else at the end of the day. And so I think there is definitely stuff when it comes to AI. You use AI in these e-waste plants to try and pick out which parts of this particular product could be reused, which parts are damaged, which parts have really expensive rare earth metals in there that we should pull out, and help with that part of the cycle. But I mean, I know you wanted to have some actionable insights for everyone here. I mean, go and look at your AI. Make sure that you are not just right-sizing it, that you're optimizing it, that you're running it, in renewable places, but also what happens at the end of life. What are you going to do with that AI when you no longer need it? Do you train a huge model that will only get used 10 times? I mean, look through that lifespan of an AI from the start of when you're starting to deploy it, and so you can, wrap it around, being responsible with that AI through its whole lifespan. I mean, cool stuff like telemetry-aware scheduling, where you can make sure that AI that is not time-sensitive just runs when there's solar power available. Like, these sorts of things are now, a reality. So make sure you go and educate yourself, listen to what we've said, but go and find out other things as well, so you can do it in that responsible way for the whole lifespan of the AI.
So for those of you who aren't sitting on stage with us, all the screens in front of me have now gone red and are blinking kind of aggressively. But I did promise the panellists one last word. I look at Rick meaningfully, word, Rick, but maybe a sentence. Look, I'm really aware that you've had a day of hearing from all kinds of different people, and you've heard lots of different conversations. If you've been lucky enough to go to the showcase, you've seen an extraordinary range of technologies. And I know usually at the end of a day like this, there's a lot to kind of process and think about. And I asked the panelists in advance to come up with one practical thing that every one of us in this room could work out and walk out of the room and do tomorrow that would help transition thinking about AI and thinking about AI for sustainability and innovation. One practical thing, Rick. No dad jokes.
I'm going to be quiet then, aren't I? No, I'm not going to say use one practical thing. What I'm going to do is take one practical action. And that's, I think people wait for perfection far too often. And with AI, there's a lot of capabilities that we've now got out of the box. Go out there, use it, and create your own puffin story. So effectively, a carry through from earlier in the day when we were told it's actually about making the future in the present, right? Just go and do things. Yeah. Amy?
Well, I was thinking about, it's like when we moved everything to cloud, AI, first it's like, let's do everything in AI, but now it's more like, let's right-size it. We're talking about if you have FinOps now to make sure that your cloud instances are all running in the right place that's, financially responsible. Why not have, I'm not sure this word will take off, but SusOps, where sustainability is also part of your procurement strategy. Like, I'm sure it is when you purchase goods, but look at it when you're looking at AI as well. So incorporate AI into that sustainable procurement strategy, run the right AI in the right places, the right time, for the right cost, and make sure you know how to turn it off at the end.
So AI not for everything, AI for the right things.
Yes.
All right, I'm leaving the unreconstructed philosopher with the last word. Justin.
I'll be really practical for a change, actually. We partnered with Hugging Face and a few other companies to develop an AI energy score. So if you are using AI in your organization, you have a model you're using, please ensure that vendor is actually, firstly, being transparent enough to develop the AI energy score for that model and check it out and start a conversation between your CIO and CSO about that.
All right, an energy score, only use it when you need it. Puffin story. Okay.
Column A, column B.
Will you join me in thanking this extraordinary collection of people?